I, 25 male, have been in a relationship with Emily, 24 female, for 2 years now. We met through mutual friends who set us up on a blind date, and from the very start, things clicked between us. We started dating soon after, and eventually moved in together. I've always been the one with the stable income, working as a software developer, so I've been the main financial contributor in our relationship. Emily, on the other hand, was in sales but recently resigned from her job to pursue business school, which her parents are funding. It wasn't a worry for me. I didn't mind taking over the household expenses entirely while she focuses on her studies. She'd be paying for groceries and gas for now, but we both knew that wouldn't last long. Once she was back on her feet, we'd go back to splitting everything again. I was okay with it. I trusted her. I loved her. For months I'd been planning to propose. We were, in many ways, soulmates, and the thought of marrying her made my heart soar. I saved up, bought the ring, and asked her to marry me just a week ago. She said yes. Our happiness was palpable. After a few blissful days, we started planning our engagement party, a celebration with our friends and family. Little did I know, that party would be the turning point, the moment everything started to unravel. Before I go into what happened, I need to say this. It was the first time I saw a side of Emily I didn't recognize, a side that shocked me. I had no idea she could be so materialistic. We invited our closest friends and family, and after about an hour of socializing, Emily came up to me. She dragged me away from a conversation with my parents, her face serious. "I need to talk to you," she whispered urgently. I followed her into the bedroom, expecting a quiet, private conversation. But when I entered, I froze. There, sitting on the bed, were all of her friends, her entire girl gang. For context, Emily had been friends with these girls since high school. There were 6 of them, all with a strikingly similar personality, spoiled, rich, entitled. Except Emily. She was different. Her parents were never wealthy, not in the way her friends' families were. They were comfortable, sure, but not overflowing with cash. Still, Emily fit in perfectly with this group. It was only recently that I began to realize how much I didn't understand about their dynamic. The moment I walked in, I felt the pressure of their gaze. I didn't belong. I didn't feel like I could speak my mind. Emily started talking, and it didn't take long for the tension to escalate. She told me that her friends had been discussing it, and they all wanted to go on a bachelorette trip before the wedding. I relaxed for a brief moment, thinking this was no big deal. I'd be having a bachelor party too, nothing too extravagant, just a way to unwind before the big day. I was okay with that. Let her have fun with her friends. But then she dropped the bombshell. "I want you to sponsor it," she said, her voice soft but insistent, not just for her but for all of her friends. They wanted to go to an exotic beach destination, stay in a fancy hotel, and party for a week. And since she was unemployed, she couldn't afford it without draining her savings. Her parents couldn't help either, not with paying for business school already on their plate. She looked at me, and for a moment all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. Her friends stared at me expectantly, their eyes narrowing, their posture like a silent plea. I wasn't prepared for this. I didn't know how to respond. I was already uncomfortable. Emily had put me on the spot in front of everyone. I did the math in my head, though I didn't need to. I already knew. There was no way I could afford this, not without dipping into my savings. And I didn't want to. I couldn't justify spending that much money on a trip I wasn't even going to be a part of. Even if they invited me, I wasn't sure I'd go. I wasn't being stingy, but the future mattered. That kind of money could be useful in an emergency, or for our future together, or for something else entirely. "I can't do it," I said, my voice tight. "I can't afford it." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Emily's face fell. Her friends looked at me as if I had betrayed them. "But why?" one of them asked, her voice dripping with disbelief. "Why can't she go?" I sighed, trying to explain, trying to make it clear without sounding rude. "You can go, sure. Just find another way to pay for it. I can't sponsor the trip for all of you, it's too much." Emily repeated that she'd pay me back. She'd find a job soon, she promised, and then she'd pay me back. But I was firm. It's not just about paying me back. It's about the fact that I'd still be out a huge amount of money, and you're asking me to pay for everyone's trip, not just yours. That's too much. I can't do it. I turned to leave the room. I wasn't comfortable discussing money with her friends right there. I thought, surely after I left, Emily would drop it. There were guests in the house, after all. But no, she followed me into the living room, and her voice, now a little sharper, cut through the noise of the party. "I'm going to pay you back," she insisted, her voice unwavering. "You don't understand. This trip is important to me. My friends have been planning this for years. I'm about to be the first one to get married. It's a big deal for all of us." I felt a surge of frustration rising inside me. "This should be special for us too," I said, trying to keep my tone even. "I don't want to end up broke before we even get married. If I sponsor this trip, we might have to elope at the courthouse." The words were harsh, maybe a little exaggerated, but I needed to make my point. I didn't think she understood the gravity of what she was asking. But before I could say anything else, her friends looked at me as though I was the villain. The reality of the situation hit me all at once. I was trapped in a conversation that I didn't want to be in, and every word I said seemed to make things worse. Was coming. After all, we hadn't spoken since that night, when everything unraveled. The silence between us had stretched thin, and I was starting to feel the weight of what had happened. The text was simple: "We need to talk." It felt almost too impersonal, but what else could I say? I wasn't going to beg. I had already told her what I needed to in that heated argument at the party. But still, part of me, the part that loved her, hoped she'd reach out first. After all, she was the one who stormed off, leaving the mess for me to clean up. Her parents had been relentless. Every few hours my phone buzzed with another message or call from them, pushing me to talk to her, to fix things. They weren't really concerned with what I wanted. They just wanted their daughter back. But I wasn't sure I could go back to what we were before, not after what she said. And I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something bigger was off, and something that had been there all along, buried beneath the surface. It had been a week. No word from Emily. I was starting to wonder if I'd made the right call. Should I go see her at the hotel, as her parents suggested? Maybe that was the move, a grand gesture to show I still cared. But something about it felt wrong. If she was still angry, if she didn't want to hear from me, it would come off as desperate, even creepy. I didn't want to risk that. I wasn't sure I even wanted to see her in that state. Would she even care? Would she throw another tantrum? So I waited. I kept the distance. A text seemed safe enough. I tried to keep calm as I thought about the conversation ahead. I didn't know what would happen, but I knew I couldn't just ignore it. This was my relationship too, not just hers. The emotional roller coaster of the last few days had left me drained, but I wasn't about to give up without hearing her side. Could we fix this? Or was it really a huge red flag, as everyone kept saying? It was time to get some clarity, time to see if there was a way forward, or if I was just clinging to something that was already broken. It wasn't supposed to end like this. I knew relationships weren't always comfortable, but this was different. Emily and I had fought before, of course. We all have our moments. But none of our arguments had ever reached the point of no return, not like this. We never needed a break from each other. We always knew we wanted to make things work, even after the toughest moments. This, though? This was the first time one of us actually moved out, refusing to speak to the other. For days. 2 days turned into 3, and still there was no word from her. Normally when we fought, it was hard to stay mad, especially when we shared a home. We'd always come back to each other. But now, there was nothing. Not a single message, no attempt to break the silence. And I was left with the responsibility to reach out first, to fix this. Maybe that's why I felt this nervous chatter in my mind. What if it's over for good? What if she's going to leave me for good this time? Could we even go back to what we had, or is that impossible now? The weight of it all felt crushing. This wasn't just another fight. This was different. She was different. Emily, she's the best partner I've ever had, and I don't want to lose that. Update 2. And then the message came. Finally, her text. She said she wanted to meet, to talk, to work things out. My heart skipped, but I braced myself. The message itself, clear, concise, but tinged with something I couldn't quite place. She'd read what I'd written, the post that I'd shared. She didn't like what she saw, of course. How could she? I had laid everything bare, the hurt, the frustration, the way her actions had shaken me, but at least she took responsibility. That was something I hadn't expected. She admitted it was her fault. She acknowledged the mess she'd caused. And then, she told me that talking over the phone wasn't right. No, this needed to happen face to face. We agreed to meet tomorrow at lunch. She said she'd drive down to my workplace and we could grab a bite somewhere nearby so I wouldn't lose too much time. I appreciated that. The thoughtfulness was still there, beneath everything, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were already too far gone. She didn't sound happy. I could hear it in her words. The lack of warmth, the distance. What was going to happen between us? What would I walk into tomorrow? Was this just going to be the last chapter where we faced the inevitable end, or was there still a chance to fix it? Her parents had stopped reaching out. That's when I knew. This wasn't just a bump in the road. They were done. If they had stopped trying to convince me, then maybe they had accepted that we were done. They didn't care enough to fight for us anymore. Or maybe they just didn't think it was worth it. I didn't know which one hurt more. Even if we did break up, I knew one thing for sure. We owed it to ourselves to meet one last time, to talk through the mess, not to let that fight at the party be our last conversation. We deserved better than that. So, I made the decision. We'd meet tomorrow. Whatever happened, at least it would end with some closure. The comments on the post had been a mix of advice. Many of you thought it was over, that her behavior was inexcusable, and I couldn't argue with that. What happened at that party was ridiculous. She had crossed a line. But I couldn't shake the part of me that still believed we could work through it, that we could somehow make it work and get married someday. It sounded naive, maybe even a little foolish, but it's what my heart wanted. I knew her. I knew how she could be, and beneath everything, beneath the nonsense of her friends and the stupidity of trying to fit into their world, there was a good person, a kind one. That was the Emily I loved. Her friends, those friends I had judged so harshly, turned out to be more insightful than I gave them credit for. They told her the truth, whether she liked it or not. They told her she needed to apologize to me, that she needed to take responsibility for what she had done if she wanted any chance of making things right. They didn't judge her for not being able to keep up with their lavish lifestyle. They didn't expect her to do the same things they did. They saw her struggle to fit in and called her out on it. It was the first time I realized her friends weren't the selfish, shallow people I had assumed. Maybe they had their faults, but in that moment, they were the ones who showed her the way. Still, despite all that, the relationship wasn't meant to last. We met today, and as expected, it was over. I wasn't surprised. Maybe I'd hoped for something different, but deep down, I knew. I knew this was the end. It wasn't supposed to end like this, not after everything we had been through. She handed back the ring, the symbol of everything we had dreamed of. Then she told me she would come back in a couple of days to grab the rest of her things. Not just a few things. She left almost everything behind. And I didn't ask where she was going. I didn't want to know. I'm sure she has her friends to stay with, people to lean on. But it doesn't change the fact that she won't be there anymore. I won't see her face in the morning, hear her laugh, share the little moments we had, and that hurts. This was by far the best relationship I've ever had, and now, it's gone. Our conversation wasn't easy. She told me she read the original post, but she couldn't bring herself to read the updates. The truth in those words, the reality of what had happened, was too painful for her. She said reading it made her see things she hadn't realized before, how she'd been floating by, relying on me and her parents instead of taking control of her own life. She didn't want that anymore. She wanted to prove she could do it on her own. She appreciated everything I had done for her, everything I had tried to do, and she wanted to thank me for that. It felt odd, hearing her say that. I didn't know how to react, so I just smiled. Maybe I should have said more, but I didn't know what else there was to say. And then, something surprising. Her friends, who I had written off as shallow, turned out to be the ones who gave her the wake-up call she needed. They told her to stop trying to impress people who didn't matter. They told her it wasn't worth sacrificing her integrity to keep up with a lifestyle that wasn't hers. They made her see that it wasn't worth losing what we had for the sake of a fleeting desire to fit in. When I heard that, I realized something. I had misjudged them. I'd assumed the worst, but they were the ones who saw her flaws and helped her face them. I guess I was wrong about them after all. But in the end, it didn't matter. We parted on good terms. We hugged, said our goodbyes, and walked away. I didn't cry then, but as soon as I got back to the office, I had to excuse myself. I couldn't hold it in anymore. Will we ever get back together?